This is the Rich Dad Radio Show. The good news and bad news about money. Here's Robert Kiyosaki.
Hello. Robert Kiyosaki, the Rich Dad Radio Show, broadcasting from beautiful downtown, Old Town, Scottsdale. And our program is always about the good news and bad news about money. And today, in my opinion, a lot of bad news, a lot of big picture, macro events that we need to watch out for more than our 401ks and what's your home price doing. So today's subject is, I think, one of the most important subjects we can all face today. It is our freedom of speech. And what really, really concerns me is our freedom of speech has been taken away. Any comments on that, Kim?
Yeah, well, I'm very excited about our guest, Robert Barnes. He's a trial attorney, a lot of high-profile cases. But what I love is he says he's fighting for citizens who have lost their access to free speech and basic constitutional rights. And he takes them on. And what I really love is that, there's so many opinions and there's so much emotion out there about the freedom of speech around vaccine passports, around this global wealth tax. And Robert's going to give us, here are the facts. Here's the legal facts. Here's what they are up against. And it's not just a walk in the park. They say this is going to happen. It's going to happen. So I'm honored to have Robert on as our guest.
And the most important reason is that the question is, what can you do as a private citizen to fight back? Because we're fighting some Magillas out there, don't step on Superman's cape. And if you step on Superman's cape, you don't know what happens to you after that. And our very good friend, George Gammon, introduced us to Robert Barnes. And George put out, I think, a crowdfunding to take on the Fed, which shows how crazy George is. But anyway, I wouldn't take on the Fed. I can barely go past my bank down the street here. So we are very honored to have Robert Barnes. Kim and I were in Miami with him, and he stood on stage and commanded the room. I really don't recall exactly what he said, but it's time to fight back. So welcome to the Rich Dad Show, Mr. Barnes.
Welcome, Robert.
Happy to be here.
So what do you have to say about the big picture on our freedom of speech? What is happening there? Big picture.
It is really a defining time since probably the most since maybe the 17th century, 18th century, that, prior to the establishment of the Bill of Rights and the First Amendment, and America became sort of the guardian and the light bearer for freedom of speech and freedom of thought around the world, that it would be protected from the state. And it is now at greater risk, in part because they're privatizing it, in part because they're delegating it to private entities to control and censor and suppress speech. And we saw over the last year what the consequences of that are, not only in terms of impacting elections and whatever people think about that, but beyond that, they censored critical stories about whether COVID was man-made or natural-made, impact issues related to the lockdowns, whether the interventions were going to be publicly beneficial or detrimental. And we've seen that. We're seeing it right now in the vaccine context, where the CDC and the World Health Organization are now acknowledging there may be unique health risks for certain groups of people, particularly in this case, young boys, in response to the vaccine. That's a greater risk than COVID presents to them, even by their analysis. But again, these are discussions and conversations that could have and should have happened, debates and dialogues that should have occurred, but for the censorship and the suppression taking place by big tech. And we're increasingly finding that it's being done at the behest and the behalf of governmental entities. So we face a unprecedented, unparalleled challenge in the modern age to the ability to have free speech, free thought, and free debate in the world.
So this is, again, going back to the big picture. Why? Why do these people want to censor us? What is wrong with free speech? What's wrong with freedom of the press? Why are they doing this?
Down deep, I always consider it a recognition and acknowledgement that they're wrong either on a moral position, a factual position, or something else. Because you're right, there's no reason to fear free speech, free thought, free debate, free dialogue if you're in the right. That was our founders' argument, that it's only if you think down deep, you know what, my position isn't popular, my position isn't correct, my position isn't morally or politically or factually correct, that I have to suppress and censor speech.
Is that also why they're censoring and trying to fight against all these election audits that are going on across the country? I mean, if they had nothing to hide, why would they stop the audit? Because we want the truth about these elections.
Completely. I mean, when the President Trump asked me to get involved on behalf of the election cases right after the election, that was my argument to the officials in Georgia. It's like you can gain everybody's confidence, including the president's, in the accuracy of the election and the integrity of its procedures by being as transparent as possible, by doing basic audit procedures and protocols. And it can't be what I call a Madoff audit. It can't be ask Madoff to double check his books and come back and tell you, don't worry, everything's fine. And yet that's precisely what they did. They had the state come back and say, don't worry, everything's fine. And now, of course, what we're finding in Georgia, we're finding in Arizona, we're finding in Wisconsin, we're finding in Pennsylvania, is there are a lot of anomalies that were not properly discovered and discussed and disclosed. And that's only going to undermine confidence in elections over the long term. But they cared more about the outcome of the election than the public confidence in the integrity of the outcome.
So let me go back again to macro, because that's where George Gammon and I hang out. Why? What are they covering up? What are they afraid? Do they know that they're screwed up, or are they just covering up to cover it up? I mean, what in the world's wrong with these people?
I think it's a bifurcated phenomenon. One is they know their positions are unpopular. So down deep, they know that it's not so much that they always think they're wrong factually or morally. It's that they know the world wouldn't accept their positions if they were open and transparent about them. So like if you went out to the world and said, we really want to be able to chip you. And in that chip, we want to be able to have, that's going to be where your currency is. That's going to be where your health records are. Maybe we can even have remote access to release vaccines through that, or some sort of drug into your body with quantum tattoos. They knew that, most Americans, most people around the world would be like, no, thank you. So instead, they have to sell it a different way. Hey, there's a scary pandemic out there. This is really dangerous for the sake of your safety, for the sake of the economy. In order to be able to communicate, to be out in the world, you need to have this little digital certificate, say, or you need to have this vaccine. And it's one step, a little further gradual. It's like what they're doing with the global tax proposal. The only way to enforce that global tax proposal is to create a global currency. And the only real way to create an effective global currency in the modern age is for that to be a digital currency. And if people think about it, imagine if there was a chip, if you could physically control your body. Look at what they're doing on biometrics in India, for example. They could identify everyone. They can track everyone. They can control everyone. And it's people who down deep think you're better off if we control you. Even if you don't recognize that benefit, you don't understand. We're the elite. We're the people that know better than you do.
So do you know, during World War II, when I studied Hitler, the way he got his plans across was a thing called a little atrocity. Little atrocities that got the Jews to wear a yellow star. And then it just got worse and worse. And so when I saw this vaccine come on the scene, to me, that was like the yellow star. Do you sense a correlation with that?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it was to make life so miserable by using public health interventions that we have never used in the history of the world. We've never employed the lockdowns as a method of dealing with an airborne virus. We've never told people to stay indoors as a response to an airborne virus that mostly dies in the sunshine and outdoors. There's a bunch of things we've never done before. And the goal wasn't to stop the virus. The goal was to condition people to be ready to say, please, government, give me a vaccine. Give me some experimental drug that hasn't even met regular FDA vaccine testing, which usually takes several years, even for a virus, a coronavirus that's never had a successful vaccine over time in its history, for a virus that's not even that lethal to most populations. So that where the unknown risk of the vaccine, the long tail risk, you could say, are going to be are the ones that are really dangerous compared to the short term risk of COVID. So it was no question this was the protocol, the procedure was to condition people. It was a real live Milgram experiment, and we just went through it.
And so as an attorney and looking at this vaccine passport, what's legal, what's not legal?
In my view, none of it is legal under the Nuremberg Code of 1947, which almost all Western and all countries around the world adopted. Because the whole, we went through this before where we trusted a bunch of white lab coats to run the world. And it led to the Connie Buck decision in the U.S. Supreme Court, morally horrendous, one of the worst decisions ever that said forced sterilizations was okay. It was relied on a prior decision called Jacobson, which said forced vaccinations could, under certain circumstances, be okay. And then that ultimately led to Korematsu. I call it the trilogy of infamy, the Jacobson, the Buck, and the Korematsu decisions, where the government said we can do whatever we want to whomever we want, whenever we want, under some fee or pretext. We have since said those decisions are horrendous, particularly the latter two. So given that, and the Nuremberg Code of 1947, and those three decisions predated that, was supposed to stop all of that because it said no more experimentation on human beings, period, in the name of medicine or in the name of science. States have no right to do so. And what states have to get is informed consent. And what that means is you have to be informed, and consent means it can't be mandatory. Our emergency use authorization statute under federal law incorporates the Nuremberg Code explicitly and expressly and says you cannot mandate this vaccine while it is simply an emergency use authorized vaccine. This was decided in the Doe v. Rumsfeld case when they tried to force it on a different experimental vaccine on soldiers back in 2001 and 2002. Then they were trying to do an anthrax experimental vaccine for people going into the Iraqi war theater. By the way, that backfired. Those who did take it, that's another story. There's a long history of this. Swine flu vaccine. People can still look it up. 60 Minutes, 1976. Last time we rushed a vaccine to deal with an epidemic, the vaccine became the epidemic. The vaccine became the real problem.
And that's a concern here as well.
Absolutely, and it should be.
Yeah.
And this is about people's right to choose. What I tell people is I'm not arguing for the vaccine or against the vaccine. I'm arguing for ordinary, everyday people's right to choose for themselves what is good for them, for parents to choose for their children, not schools, not governments, not politicians, for everybody to choose for themselves, because that's what the Nuremberg Code of 1947 was all about. It was never again. And in my view, in fact, federal courts have enforced the Nuremberg Code. I believe is part of the Constitution, the right to privacy includes the right to bodily integrity. How is it you could have a right to terminate a life in terms of abortion, but you don't have a right to determine whether the government sticks some experimental product in your body? Those two don't go together. If somebody believes in one, I don't see how they believe in the other. And so in my view, it's not constitutional. The Nuremberg Code is enforceable. The statute doesn't permit it. There's also issues with employers doing it under the ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act. So there's issues with government requiring public disclosure of it under HIPAA. So I think there's a range of issues that legally are going to be litigated by me and Bobby Kennedy on these cases to the degree they actually start mandating it.
So once again, going back to my original question, why? I mean, do you know what I mean? But this is. Let me dumb it down to the rich dad level of comprehension. I think these guys were a bunch of nerds in school. Do you know what I mean? And they got no respect. And they thought the only way they could get respect is become this academic elite and look down their noses on people and all this. And it's, in my opinion, it's their dark side coming out. They don't like being nerds. They want to control us. They didn't like that they weren't cool. And is that oversimplistic?
I tell people we're living in an age of Bond villains, of real life Bond villains.
Yeah.
Because that's your typical old school, but before the recent the Bond films, you go back to the 70s and the 60s, your Bond films were over the top, these kind of personalities, ego driven, personal vendetta driven, people who once they seize power are going to show the world how important they are. And there's probably nobody who sort of embodies this more than Bill Gates. And you have a guy that for a dozen years has been pursuing this kind of stuff. You go back and listen. He believes in death panels. He's been obsessed with vaccines for over a decade. He thinks it leads to reduced population. And whatever you think of Bill Gates' politics or belief structure, one of the things he did well is he spent a massive amount of money just on public health authorities all around the world. Politico actually did a piece on it 4 years ago where whistleblowers were saying this guy has way too much influence in the world public health space. And this was the European version of Politico. And and we saw what happened in this pandemic, when the lockdown. And it was every strategy that was put out was something that Bill Gates had endorsed over the last decade. He was the principal guy behind the modelers. The modelers are principally funded by him, number 2 funder of the World Health Organization. And the way I put it is, I was like, people can agree or disagree with Bill Gates. My view is we should have public discussion and debate and dialogue about this, and we shouldn't let Bill Gates tell us what our lives are going to be. And what Bill Gates thinks is Bill Gates knows what's best for you, and you shouldn't decide for yourself. He should decide for you. Here you have a guy running around. They're treating him like he's a scientist. All he was a big tech monopolist who was really good at stealing stuff, as he himself bragged about with Steve Jobs, and then really good at monopolizing stuff. This is not a moral or medical hero.
So it's pretty accurate. It's the nerds are running the world. Is it revenge of the nerds?
And it's the darkest ones. It's the ones that were, had the really dark little, American Psycho little drawings when they were 15 in the back of the class. They weren't the fun ones that you wanted to secretly cheer for.
They weren't the school jock. That's for sure.
They were not.
Oh, no, definitely not.
But I love what you said, Robert, that the world would not accept what they want to do. And so when we come back, I do want to get more into the whole controlling of the narrative that's out there with the mainstream media. They've just made it so anybody that questions anything is a conspiracy theorist. They're wrong. We're racist. We're this, we're that. And what do we do? How do we fight against that?
So anyway, Mr. Barnes, Rich Dad makes his money because we keep things simple. And we're now back down to Revenge of the Nerds. I'm glad we got that.
Revenge of the Nerds, American Psycho version.
When we come back, we'll figure out how we can revenge the Revenge of the Nerds. We'll be right back. Thank you. Welcome back, Robert Kiyosaki, the Rich Dad Radio Show, the good news and bad news about money. And today's subject is a highly enlightened subject. It's called Revenge of the Nerds. And we're going to go, our guest today is Robert Barnes, and he is the guy seeking revenge on the nerds. When I was in high school, I was one of those jocks. I should never have picked on those little nerds. Anyway,
it's your fault, Robert. It's all your fault.
I think they're coming after us finally. So anyway, you can listen to the Rich Dad Radio Show anytime, anywhere on iTunes, Android, and YouTube. And please leave a comment. And all of our programs are archived at TheRichDadRadio.com. That's because we have nothing to sell. We're purely educational, informational, just awareness-based. So if you listen to this radio program one more time, you'll gain twice as much, because repetition is how we learn. But more importantly, get together with friends, family, and business associates, any nerds you know, and have them listen to this program, because they're the greatest threat to humanity today. The nerds are taking over the world. Any comments, Kim?
Well, yes, I'm really so happy to have Robert Barnes on the show today, because he is giving us the legal perspective, and very, very high-profile trial attorney. But that I'm why I love it is because it's sanity to me, because I am pro-Constitution. I am pro-free speech. I am pro-free markets, and I am pro-law. This is, as Trump said, we are a country of laws, and I am pro-law, and all the narrative out there just is nonsense to me. So I'm just thrilled to have you on and giving a perspective from the legal side. So thank you again.
We ran into Robert at George Gammon's event in Miami last couple of weekends ago, and he blew the audience. Robert just mesmerized the audience. And so it was a fantastic, fantastic program. But I'd like to go one step back is Robert Kennedy Jr. Man, that guy's a fighter, isn't he? I mean, he's like his family.
Oh, absolutely. I mean that goes way, way back. I mean, obviously, his father was assassinated when he was a teenager. His uncle was assassinated when he was also a teenager. I mean, so he went through or a little bit younger than that, and he just always been willing to speak his mind. And his own family went through things that led him to say maybe vaccines aren't this sort of magical gift from the stork. Like somehow like babies are born. That maybe there's something else. Maybe these are just drugs like anything else, and we should treat them accordingly. And from that, his Children's Health Defense has been one of the lead organizations, particularly on the left, one of the only organizations on the left that has been willing to say these lockdowns are wrong. We should have public health, public dialogue, opposing censorship. He's brought major lawsuits against Facebook for colluding with the state to suppress his organization. And all he would do is cite government reports and scientific studies. It wasn't like he was, looking out for anybody on the Reddit thread and he was saying, here's this theory. He was saying, here's what this study shows. Here's what this study shows. Here's what the Vaccine Reporting Service is reporting. So and he's doing critical work at Children's Health Defense, does a publication called The Defender. He's also very, very good at putting the dots together. So, he started putting the dots together very early on about Bill Gates, and about other related groups that have an ulterior agenda, buying up the world's farmland, like Bill Gates, one of the maybe now the number one farmland owner in the United States. Like, why exactly is it? I just don't. It's a good way to think of this, as you say, Robert, is just don't trust the nerds. If the nerds are up to something, it's probably bad. You can't give them too much power. You got to keep them locked up in the room, and that's the case with Gates. And so Bobby Kennedy's doing great work. Anybody with a vaccine issue or any other issue related to COVID that's under 18, Children's Health Defense is going to be taking the lead and bringing legal action actions and petitions and lawsuits all around the world. So that's the organization to go to. For people over 18, I and some other lawyers will be taking the lead.
Oh, thank you.
And your website, Robert?
Is Barnes Law LLP as in Peter.com. And so we'll be updating stuff there in terms of the Fed lawsuits. We'll be updating stuff there with the COVID lawsuits. For example, well, the legal ethics boards don't allow me to give free legal or certain kinds of legal advice. So what will happen is sometimes a letter will come to me by in a bottle. And this letter will happen to be a letter that anybody can copy and paste and use as they want. So the ethics boards can't complain. And actually, this letter worked. I did a letter for it during the elections about certain aspects of audits, and then that ended up leading to some good results. And we did the same with the vaccine mandate. The letter basically outlines the various legal objections I've articulated here, but put in sort of colloquial language, accessible language, so it doesn't look obvious. It looks like it's written by someone who knows what they're talking about, but not necessarily a lawyer. And a bunch of people have used it all across the country. And a good number of them have got good results, because often when employers find out, hold on a second, I might be on the hook if there's something wrong with the vaccine if I mandate it, there's a fair number of employers that reconsider their position.
That's good.
It's a useful thing. I put that up on our locals board that people can find, and that's a way to kind of help people. But the law firm website will have a lot of that stuff on it over the coming months so that people can use it however they want to use it.
And that's Barnes Law LLP.
Yes.
Thank you. Now let's get into what George Gammon is doing. He's used crowdfunding to appoint you to take on the Fed. Can you guys take on a bigger organization? Why pick on
small task?
Why pick on 800 nerds?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, nerds with real money. What's amazing is the Fed has sort of dodged this for forever under this sort of fake. Some days they're public, some days they're private. Depends on who they're talking about and who's asking questions, whether they're a governmental entity or not, whether they're obligated by transparency or not. When they want the power, they claim they're a governmental agency. When they don't want people asking questions, they claim they're a private entity. And in 2010, they lost several big FOIA cases, but they were very specific.
FOIA being the Freedom of Information Act.
Yes, exactly. That's right. Freedom of Information Act, really powerful. People should look at it. All these Fauci emails that are coming out now are because Judicial Watch and other people did a bunch of FOIA requests. The same with, Hillary Clinton's email scandal, all because people just kept asking for FOIA requests. A lot of scandals over the last 50 years. It's some nerd, a nice nerd, says, some obsessive, ordinary, everyday person saying, you know what, I wonder what this is, and writing a letter and a FOIA request, and who knows what they stumble on. In this case, some people stumbled on maybe COVID was man-made and maybe our government knew it all along. So the same thing is I want to use, in order to audit the Fed, we got to FOIA the Fed. And then ultimately we're probably going to have to sue the Fed because presumably, so George came to me and said, hey, I want to do something to get behind the curtain to see what's really going on in the internal workings of the Federal Reserve. Because the Federal Reserve, I always have a principle for my clients. I would say never in writing and always in cash, as Uncle Earl Long would say back in the day. But the government is really bad at doing that. So and consequently, I think there's going to be a lot of stuff in writing and a lot of interesting cash transactions. And so I want to see where and we're going all the way back to 1913. So I have a bank auditor, a guy who's just been a bank auditor and a bank executive for 20 years. And he's doing this in secret. I'm not putting his name out there for obvious reasons, but he's been, he's a guy who's been studying the Fed for forever. So he's coming up with a long list of questions. Other people are sending me items. We're going to FOIA the dickens out of them for the next 6 months. So we're going to request all kinds of things from all the different all the different divisions of the bank, not only the DC, but all the, New York, Atlanta, St. Louis, et cetera. And we're going to be asking for records that go all the way back to 1913. Because I'm curious about what they really said their power was over time. What did they recognize limits on their authority that they're clearly now way, way past? These various special vehicles that they're doing now. Where exactly does that come from in the legal authority? Who exactly do they have conversations with? All of those conversations and discussions internally, the memorandums, the rest, and all the internal books. We're going to use FOIA. We're going to FOIA the Fed to audit the Fed, and then if necessary, sue the Fed. And if things really get too crazy, I'll always blame George. It was George's idea.
So how does a person finance or support or contribute to the this campaign?
So right now, George basically did most of the funding. He did just a little bit of crowdfunding so that people could feel they have a voice in the process. And we anticipate doing more of that for two different reasons. One is we anticipate the Fed is going to fight like mad. So these are probably going to be a dozen or more lawsuits in a bunch of different jurisdictions against the best lawyers in the world. So we're going to be fighting to fight the Fed in court. It's probably going to be long and protracted, and we know that coming. And so there'll be a need for a second round of fundraising. But the other thing we wanted to do is we wanted to show people, the other lawyers, that there are people you can take on that right now you don't think you can because there isn't money to do so. Because with FOIA suits, normally there's nobody has the funds to fund it. And we want to show, there's a lot of people out there that want to use their collective power, their collective crowdfunding power to reverse the equation at who runs our legal system. And I want to use this as an example, as a template that other lawyers can see and say, you know what, I can take on this government agency. I can take on this powerful institution. I can take on these evil nerds, and I can be on the same level playing field because I got masses of people behind me, because I got a lot of I am Spartacuses.
That's like the Reddit crowd going after GameStop and AMC and all those guys, right?
Precisely. It's exactly the same thing. Their ability to crowdfund and mass leverage the community writ large to take on hedge funds that nobody thought could be beat. Right. It's like GameStop may be way overvalued, but just the joy of seeing some people like Stephen Cohen lose billions of dollars is a beautiful, beautiful thing.
So they can get information at your website. They can get information at George Gammon's website too.
That's exactly right. So George will be constantly updating it, and I'll be updating it the Barnes Law website too.
Okay, I know you have a question. I have a question too. So we got a lot here going on.
My final question is, what's his name? Hunter Biden and this computer? Is that subject to FOIA?
Potentially, because it was at different times. This is why the feds were trying to keep it out of their custody. This is why when they raided Rudy Giuliani's offices or at home, and he's like, "Hey, come take this Hunter stuff." They're like, "No, we'll leave that," which was a violation of the search warrant for them not to take everything that was in electronic storage form. It's because once the government has it, they're going to digitize a copy of it. Oh. Now they're subject to FOIA request of somebody else getting their hands on it, confirming it what it is. So that's why they're trying to not have it. That's why they've gone to such great lengths to. This is like the Clinton emails. They're like, "What? We don't have those. We don't know where those are. We're over there playing hot potato." So that's. But I think ultimately there's going to be a lot of records there that somebody somewhere kept a track record of things, and someday, someplace it will come out. I'll say this: if you start seeing government leaks about Biden investigation accelerating, it means they're trying to push old Joe out and put Kamala in. So I think they're holding it as blackmail material.
Yeah, that was good point. Good point. So I have a final question. So back to the censorship thing. So many people are going along with this narrative that the mainstream media is putting out there. They're believing it. They're blind sheep. So we get censored all the time. How do we fight? How do we fight against that? What can we do?
Well, I think one key is just having different platforms. So the availability of things like Locals, what Locals is doing is fantastic. What George is doing is setting up his own independent website is good. All of that is critical. And I think that's part one. We need an exit ramp. And so Dave Rubin got together with some of the top people in Silicon Valley that are on the free speech side of the equation, got a bunch of other smart tech people. And so Locals it's locals.com. You can find tons of people there. I don't know if you guys are up there yet, but
we're going to check it out.
Oh, absolutely. Should get, because it's you can do audio, you can do video, you can do live streaming, you can do live chat, you can do Facebook commentary. And the only rules are the First Amendment governs. That's the only speech that will be removed. And you get to control all your own information. You, the audience and you, the creator, not anybody else. Locals doesn't own it. You own it. So I think that was part one, is we need an independent economic entrepreneurial solution outside of the state. And Locals is the best one that's providing that. That's part one. Part two is taking apart big tech legally by every means possible. And that includes these antitrust legislation that's going through, that includes antitrust actions, that includes free speech suits, like the ones Harmeet Dillon is bringing in California, like the ones Silva is bringing in Massachusetts, like the one Bobby Kennedy's bringing. And I've been a part of a lot of those cases. So just take, in order to have real revenge on the nerds, you got to use every tool in the toolbox.
Oh, and of course, all of these lawsuits are not being reported. So I'm happy to hear that all of this action is being taken.
Oh, yes. It's going to happen from every which way possible. They haven't talked about Locals, and they haven't talked about the lawsuits for the same reason, because these are effective threats to counteract the monopolistic power of big tech.
Well, Mr. Barnes, thank you. And please come back anytime you have something you'd like to say.
Yeah.
And we won't censor you, we promise.
We'd love to have you back on as a regular guest. Can I ask, do we have time for one last question? I just want a quick snippet on this whole global wealth tax. That's a big subject, I know, but from listening to you, there's a lot of hoops that these people have to jump through in order to make that happen. Can you just make a comment on that?
Absolutely. Their goal is to have one centralized taxation system that's really about one centralized currency system. That's not the dollar as a reserve currency, but as a digital currency because it's ultimate control. Ultimate control. If they can control whether you can pay your rent, buy your food, or hop on a bus, then they run your life. And the global tax system is the first step to a global currency system because they can't right now administer the global tax system effectively, but due to lack of information, due to lack of control of the underlying capital, property, or currency. Global currency system is what they will use the inability to effectively collect the global tax as their pretext to say they need, as one of their pretexts, to say they need a global digital currency. Then in order to raise the revenue, we just really need this centralized mechanism that's very easy to know where everybody's at all the time and to be able to collect whatever money we want. But if people should be aware, if people who don't have a plan B or an exit plan of some type, you want to have that plan before you have to absolutely need it. You don't want to need that plan when you absolutely have to have it. So that nature of people should be prepared because this is what's going on. They're going to go to have global control over you as an individual at every level. And the next great battle over the next decade will be those of us who care more about liberty than we do control.
Thank you.
Right said.
So we have time. Please give our regards to Robert Kennedy Jr. Tell him to keep up the fight.
Oh, absolutely.
And so thank you very much.
Thank you
Mr.
for what you're doing, Robert.
Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
All right.
And we come back. We'll be the final words for the Rich Dad Radio Show. We'll be right back. Thank you. Welcome back, Robert Kiyosaki, the Rich Dad Radio Show, the good news and bad news about money. Thanks to Robert Barnes. He's a guy with George Gammon taking on the Fed, which I love. And I'm glad we got it down to the Rich Dad level of comprehension. This is called the revenge of the nerds. And that's what this whole thing is. These nerds are getting even. You know, I was a jock in school. And I should never have picked those little bastards. Do you know what I mean? You went to my high school reunion. You saw the nerds, didn't you?
I did see the nerds. We all had. There's all nerds in our high school classes. We all had nerds.
So who was the biggest nerd in yours class? Was it you? Were you a nerd?
No. I was like that independent person. Like I wasn't a jock. That
was me too.
I just kind of floated between everyone. I wasn't smart enough to be a nerd. That's for sure.
And I wasn't cool enough. I was not in the in crowd. You know what I mean? I was a dumb jock. I play football, and geez, they're nasty little bastards.
But back to Robert Burns. Okay, so Robert Burns, he's taken on the Fed, but he's fighting. He is fighting for our freedom and for our liberties. And it was such a breath of fresh air to hear all the legal lawsuits and things that are coming against this elite who want to control us, basically.
I think the most refreshing news is like the Reddit crowd took on GameStop, and they took on whatever they're taking on these days. But we can fight back.
Yes.
And so we use the same weapon they use on us, social media. We use social media to take them on. And I'm glad to hear that about locals, because Dave Rubin always mentions that. So let's fight back. You know what I mean? I didn't like nerds then. I don't like them now. So
Robert said that because you've asked this question of so many of our guests, why? Why are they doing this? Why are they doing this? Why are they doing this? And I think Robert Barnes gave us the best answer when he said they know the world will not accept what they want to do.
They're evil bastards.
Yeah, we do not want it, and they know it, and so they're using every trick in the book to make us compliant.
But that's what Hitler did. It was called a little atrocity. Right. They got the German people. So, well, how can we get the German people to, murder? I think they murdered a total of 18 million, 60 million Jews, 18 million people. But it all started with what they call a little atrocity. We'll get them to wear a yellow star, and that's the mask. Mm-hmm. That's your vaccine card. Mm-hmm. So they're getting ready to murder us all, those little bastards. I should never have picked on them. I knew it.
but Bob Turner here in our office, he said it really well. He says, all we're doing is questioning. We're just questioning things. We're not we're just questioning. And to question is like, now you're a racist, now you're a conspiracy theorist. We're just questioning what's going on.
And I give Bobby Kennedy Jr., man, a lot of credit. Boy, that guy's got guts. I mean, what else are you going to do? I mean, you can just let the world run you over. It's like we're talking about certain members of our families. Like, oh, you guys are just conspiracy theorists.
Yep.
I'm going, no, look at what they're doing.
Just take a
look. You got
look.
that stupid mask on. You're taking a stupid vaccine. That's what Hitler did, idiots. You know, as Jim Rogers said the other day, all the way from Singapore, he says the one thing we learned about history is what, Sarah?
You don't learn anything from history.
So anyway, this has been it's
great
refreshing,
show.
it's
Yep.
stimulating. I'm refreshed, should I say. I'm ready to fight back.
Yeah, we want to bring Robert Barnes back and give us updates as we go. But I think that's the most important piece, is that we can fight back, and we need to fight back. And so don't just lay down and be compliant. We got to fight.
Final word, Sarah.
Final words is it's refreshing because I feel like there's a bunch of us that kind of feel the same way. We're ready to fight, but we're looking for that leader to help us take on the big guys because we can't do it ourselves. And I feel like connected to Robert Barnes for some reason. Like I feel like I'll follow this guy wherever he's going, which might not be smart, but so it was very refreshing, and I'm excited about what he's talking about, what's coming down. So
what was it like? Because you were in Miami at George Gammon's event. What was it like to sit in the audience and watch this guy stand up there? And
he was actually the first speaker that I saw. We skipped the very first one, and I was instantly drawn in. I wanted to learn more. I could not wait till we got back, so I could get him on the show to learn more, because he's so smart. He knows his stuff, and I'm glad.
His history.
He's taken on some very high-profile clients and won.
Exactly, and so it gave me confidence that this guy, was the real deal.
So when they start asking for more money to fight, please donate generously. This is worth donating money to.
Yeah,
So,
and we'll put a link to Robert Barnes' website in the description, barneslawllp.com, where you'll learn more about all the work he's doing and going to do with this.
and George Gammon, because George is the lead guy funding this thing.
Right.
So, final word, Kim?
No, this was refreshing. I'm all about the freedom of speech. I'm all about our freedoms and liberties, the Constitution, protecting that. So this was a very uplifting program for me, and I'm excited about moving forward in this direction.
And as a U.S. Marine, one of the highlights of George's events in Miami was the Marines walked in. Mm-hmm. And I forgot where I came from. They had a major and a staff sergeant. And I always remember that line because that was my education as I went to military school and 6 years Marine Corps. And so I always remember Colonel Jessup, played by Jack Nicholson in A Few Good Men. And this is to all the American people and all the people of the world. You want the truth? You can't handle the truth. And I think that's what's wrong with America. We listen to the nerds. Thank you for listening to the Rich Dad Radio Show.
Thôi mong chờ, vậy sao bật khóc trong ngu ngơ? Vẫn thế đây, bao lâu nay em không hay, chỉ một mình anh ngồi khóc. Nước mắt đây, riêng nơi đây em không hay, sự thật là anh nhớ em. Người giờ đã xa, lời hẹn ước đâu rồi? Nước mắt đây rơi biết bao lâu thì khô. Vẫn thế đây, bao đêm say em không hay, từng giọt buồn sao mặn đắng. Nhưng lúc ấy anh loay hoay trong cơn say, lại nhầm rằng em ở đây. Người giờ đổi thay, tình mình vẫn đong đầy. Thế mới biết anh vẫn yêu em, thì sao tìm quên chốn xưa ngày ta quen.